The events begin somewhere, where a man is driving a carriage. Suddenly, several huge monsters called goblins appear, chasing the man and trying to catch him. The man screams for help, and then the warriors arrive to deal with the goblins. Their leader says that if one goblin appears, there are 100 more, and he urges his companions to eliminate all the goblins. A fierce battle starts against the goblins, with the warriors cutting off their heads with swords. Then, a huge warrior swings an axe and takes down a goblin's head, while the others finish off the remaining goblins. The scene shifts to Vite, who is guarding the kingdom's gate and complaining about hunger. The warriors pass by him, and the massive warrior mentions he finally reached level 6 after chasing goblins that day. His companions decide to claim the reward and share it, and Vite overhears them, guessing they are goblin hunters, saying he will never be one of them. He puts his hand on his stomach, lamenting it is useless because it won't stop growling. He reminds himself that his suffering is due to his skill called gluttony, hence he should be grateful to have a job at all. Suddenly, the trio of siblings, the Valerics, appears, and the citizens clear a path for them since they are sacred guardians. Something slips from one citizen and bumps into Hado's shoe, one of the siblings. The citizen apologizes, but Hado harshly rebukes him, calling him scum, and then kicks him away. Hado's sister, Memel, intervenes, threatening the citizen, saying he must know what happens if he insults sacred knights, asserting that his neck will be cut. At this point, the third brother, Rafal, steps in to settle the dispute, telling Hado and Memel to stop. They have to follow Rafal, saying to the citizen that he's lucky. The warriors watching from a distance comment on how terrible the situation is, finding it hard to believe that Lady Roxy is a sacred knight like them. The three siblings reach Vite, and Rafal asks if he has done a good job guarding the gate instead of them. When Vite confirms, Rafal tosses some coins on the ground and asks Vite to pick them up. Vite tries to grab the coins, but Hado steps on his hand, sarcastically saying he didn't notice. Rafal says Vite is pitiful, as his loud stomach makes it seem like they don't feed him. Then Hado kicks him in the stomach, asking if he's trying to embarrass the Valeric family. Hado hits him again, calling him scum, while Memel asks him who his benefactor is, saying a useless person like him wouldn't be earning money without them, so he should be grateful to the sacred knights. Hado starts yelling at him to stand up again, but Vite can't because he is seriously hurt. Rafal states that Vite needs a harsh lesson. Just then, Roxy arrives and stops the trio, saying dishing out violence to citizens they swore to protect is not worthy of a sacred knight. She reminds them that guarding the gate is a sacred duty. Rafal replies that providing work to the destitute is a duty too. Roxy looks at Hado's foot on Vite's face and asks if that treatment is necessary. Rafal casually excuses himself and takes Hado and Memel away from the scene. Roxy quickly runs to Vite, extends her hand to help him up, and asks if he is okay. She then places a cloth on his face, asking him not to move because he is bleeding. Vite thanks her, and she tells him they are comrades when it comes to guarding the gate, adding that a sacred knight should behave like this. Roxy reaches out her hand to Vite, saying it's time for her shift to start, and Vite hands her the flag. Here, Roxy asks him to tell her if the trio bullies him again. He reassures her that he's used to it, and then leaves for the tavern. There, Vite started to hear Roxy's words echoing in his mind, telling himself that he couldn't imagine what Rafal would do to him if he snitched to Roxy. The waiter interrupted him, asking if he had been hit again, confirming that if things continued like this, he would end up like the previous guy, because those three behaved violently and cruelly, and there's only one result for that, which is not good. But Vite didn't comment. He paid his money, thanked the waiter, and left silently. On his way home, he wished he had been born with a different skill than greed, affirming that when a person has nothing, they will remain a failure forever. Meanwhile, Vite noticed some thieves near the gate, so he quickly ran to tell Roxy, who decided to arrest the thieves immediately and asked him to take over guarding the gate instead. Vite took the guard's banner from her and wished her good luck, but suddenly saw a thief running towards him. He thought to himself that if he ran away, it would cause problems for Roxy since she had entrusted him with guarding the gate, so he charged at the thief with his spear and stabbed it into his chest. The thief fell to the ground, bleeding, while Vite's greed skill activated, adding the skills of recognition and telepathy to him. Roxy soon arrived and worriedly asked if he was okay. Vite froze because he could hear Roxy's inner voice. Nevertheless, he told her he was fine, and she informed him that she needed to report what happened to her superiors. But Vite was distracted since he couldn't hear her inner voice again, so Roxy called out to him with concern. He replied that she could attribute all this to her, reminding him that he had taken down one of the thieves and asked if he was afraid that Mr. Rafal would find out. She also admitted that she would have failed her duty without him, and then insisted that she needed to show him her gratitude, offering him a job with the Hart family, wondering if he intended to serve the Fleury family until he was killed. Before Vite could respond, Roxy told him that his future was in his hands now. Vite began comparing his work with the Fleury family to working with the Hart family, telling himself that his future would be bright working with Mrs. Roxy, but he wondered wondered who would fill his place with the Fleury family. Roxy told him that guarding the gate was the duty of all holy knights. Vite accepted the job with the Hart family, saying he would be pleased to do so. Afterward, Vite returned home and started wondering about the recognition and telepathy skills, remembering hearing Roxy's inner voice. He then realized that the skill was indeed telepathy. Still, Vite curiously questioned what was happening to his body, affirming that these skills might enable him to defeat monsters easily. The next day, Vite went to buy a sword. The seller asked him about his budget, and Vite opened his hand to show him the money he had. The seller scoffed, telling him he was wasting his hospitality on a poor person, stating firmly that he couldn't buy a weapon with such a small amount. Vite thought to himself that since he arrived in the royal capital 5 years ago, he had only managed to save these 2 silver coins from working. The seller pointed to a barrel of weapons, mentioning to Vite that he could only buy a weapon from the few in the barrel. Vite said that was better than nothing, and started examining the swords, using his recognition skill to test their strength, until he found one he liked, a dirty black sword, treated like trash. Vite realized that sword resembled him perfectly, but he stepped back in panic when the sword called him boy, confessing that he was greedy and could be wielded with one hand. Then, it promised him he would be worthy of its service if he bought it, calling him the greedy one. Vite asked how it knew that about him, and the sword replied that they had many shared traits. Meanwhile, Mamil was conveying the news of Vite's employment at the Hart household to Rafal, suggesting that Roxy should be taught a lesson for challenging their family and trying to employ Vite without consulting them. Rafal, indifferent, replied that many could take Vite's place, and it wasn't worth the trouble. Mamil reminded him that Roxy complained about how they carried out the guarding duty. Rafal told her that the Hart and Fleury families were part of the 5 great families that supported the kingdom, so there was no point in complicating things between them. Rafal then got up, saying it was time to head to the military district. Mamil asked him what kind of studies he was conducting there that made him so excited. Rafal replied that those studies were to discover the path to immortality. Somewhere, Vite walked with his sword, which informed him that it had learned its name. Suddenly, the sword alerted Vite, warning him of danger. He immediately turned and knocked down one of the goblins. At that moment, Vite's greed skill activated, adding the strength enhancement skill to him, and many more goblins appeared. Vite thought they were right when they said that seeing one goblin meant 100 were close behind. He charged at the goblins with his sword, swinging it left and right until he took out all the goblins. Vite then noticed that his stomach hadn't growled at all that day. The sword then told him that he should thank the greed skill, as usually, his statistics would increase through fighting, and his level would rise based on experience, but the greed skill steals statistics and skills without benefiting from experience, so he was still at level 1. Vite asked the sword how it knew all this, and the sword told him that they were similar in that way, confirming that the greed skill worked against the holy law. Then it suggested that he collect the goblin heads for his reward. After some time, Vite looked at his reward, saying that 38 goblin ears earned him 3 silver coins and 8 bronze coins, enough to order meat for dinner. But the sword stopped him, saying he needed to maintain it first, stressing that he didn't get the title greedy for nothing. Suddenly, while Vite was walking, he bumped into a man who was treating a girl violently while she cried for help. Vite decided to help her and ran after the man, who was abusing the girl somewhere, telling her that she would become a toy for the holy knights. In the orphanage, the saint was explaining to a group of children that their world was created by Saint Lablas, who gave them the skills to thrive. She told them that these skills were blessings from the gods, and they should be thankful for them. Then, she asked the children to have their meal, but she noticed one child wasn't eating. So, the saint asked him if he felt tired. The child grumbled that Saint Lablas was unfair, because the holy knights and warriors had amazing skills, unlike him, who had a weak ability. The saint reminded him that in the past, there were no skills, statistics, or even monsters, and everyone was equal. Hearing this, the child wished he had been born in those times and broke down in tears. The saint comforted him while another nun entered, saying she had searched everywhere for Sahara, but would look around the town as well. Meanwhile, the kidnapper was holding the little girl somewhere, tormenting her as she cried in despair. Suddenly, the kidnapper vanished, and Vite appeared to the girl, assuring her that she would be okay. He extended his hand and told her that this was their chance to escape. However, the kidnapper's voice interrupted, saying he encountered fools like Vite every day who barged in out of curiosity. Vite unsheathed his sword, only to be mocked by the kidnapper, who questioned how he could fight while protecting the girl. The child hid behind Vite, who told himself that his priority was to ensure her safety. At that moment, his sword urged him to step back a little because his opponent thought he was stronger and would take advantage of that confidence at the right moment. Vite grabbed the girl and retreated. The kidnapper then drew his weapon, ready to chase after Vite, threatening him that if he killed him in front of the girl, she would become completely obedient afterward. Here, Vite's sword commanded him to attack now. Vite knocked over the crates he was hiding behind and rushed towards the kidnapper. He leaped high and suddenly struck down on the kidnapper, shattering his weapon. The kidnapper fell to the ground in fear, and Vite asked him who had ordered him to kidnap the girl. The kidnapper replied that he would never talk, so Vit plunged his sword into the kidnapper's chest. The kidnapper revealed that it was Heido who had requested this. Vit's eyes widened in shock, and then he gently took the girl with him. On the way, he asked her name, and she replied, Sahara. Vit introduced himself too and offered her food. He bought her some meat and warned her to be careful as it was hot. When she took a bite, Sahara told him she had never eaten meat before and found it very delicious. Vit moved his share closer to her and told her she could eat his portion too. After that, Sahara returned to the orphanage where the saint was searching for her. When Sahara saw her, she hugged her under Vit's watchful gaze. Sahara thanked him for everything he did for her, which surprised Vit as no one had ever thanked him before, considering he had a terrible skill. Sahara asked if his skill was weak too, to which Vit replied that he always felt hungry. Then Vit approached Sahara and told her that no matter how tough things got, if she could laugh in the face of her skill, she would surely find happiness. This reminded Vit of when his father first told him that quote, saying he hadn't understood its meaning back then. After that, Sahara said goodbye and left. Vit's sword then told him that it seemed like he had now gained the skill to wield a sword with one hand. Vit asked if that was good, and the sword confirmed, saying that gaining such a technical skill would also come with secret techniques and arts, allowing him to attack twice in one strike. Then, Vit remembered when the sword talked about something called the sharp edge during the kidnapper's attack. He scolded the sword for not warning him enough during the attack, saying he almost lost his life if he had been hit by the kidnapper. The sword replied that no one can interrupt a hero while saving a child. Vit told the sword he was not a hero, insisting that luck sometimes plays a role in winning battles, and it's not guaranteed that the hero always wins. At that moment, the sword asked if he planned to go to his first day at the Hart family looking like that tomorrow, causing Vit to drop the sword while shouting that he forgot to buy new clothes. In the old tavern, the aged Ad shared with the bartender the news about Mr. Mason's fall at the hands of a sacred dragon, saying it was confirmed by a warrior friend. The bartender asked what would happen to the Hart family then. Ad replied that Mrs. Roxy would take charge after Mr. Mason, but he wasn't sure how well she could handle the sacred knights. The bartender asked if he meant the Flerick brothers, and then he served Ad his drink, adding that he liked to talk only about happy things. Ad inquired about Vit, and the bartender replied that he used to come to the tavern every day after work. The next day, Vit went to the Sacred Knights district, specifically to the Hart Manor, where Roxy welcomed him, confirming she had been waiting for him. However, Vit seemed very distracted, so Roxy asked what was wrong. He replied that he was at a loss for words because of her beauty. Roxy shyly told him that she dressed up from time to time and noted that he looked nice too. Then, Roxy took him to her father's grave, saying Vit would work with them starting today. Vit asked who was in the grave, to which Roxy replied it was her father, who had passed away 5 days ago after encountering a sacred dragon in Gallia. Vit was shocked because Gallia was a continent filled with monsters, and it was the sacred knight's duty to fight them. Roxy mentioned that this year's duty fell on the Hart family, as a sacred dragon that hadn't left its lair in over 1,000 years had appeared and killed all her father's men. Vit apologized to Roxy for not knowing what she was going through. Roxy told him not to be sad, revealing she was now the head of the Hart family, and from now on they would work together to bring joy to the manor. She extended her hand to shake his, but he stopped himself from shaking her hand to prevent his telepathic skill from activating. Fortunately for him, the maid Haro arrived at that moment and saved the situation. Roxy introduced Haro to him and vice versa. Haro welcomed him and informed him that she was the head of the servants at the manor, asking him to behave in a manner befitting a member of the Hart family. After that, Vit had meat with the servants. Days went by, and Vit was trimming trees. Oliver ordered him to take a break after finishing the trimming, while Minerva commented that he seemed eccentric. She noted that he had started a week ago, but had seen him talking to his sword constantly. Oliver added that he had also seen him trembling while eating meat. Vit asked them to take it easy on him, as he hadn't eaten meat in 5 years. The two men laughed, saying they had just had lunch and asked if he had eaten. Suddenly, Haro came to him, saying Mrs. Roxy wanted to see him. Vit ran after her to meet Roxy, but was surprised because his stomach was asking for food even though he just ate. He met Roxy, who called him Fee. After a long moment of distraction, he told her that his father used to call him that too, but he lost him during a monster hunting mission. He then asked why she called him Fee. Roxy explained that it was a suitable nickname for him, and added that he had become part of the Hart family now. Vit was shocked and told her it would be better if she called him by his full name. Suddenly, he stood up defensively and fainted. Later, Vit woke up in his room to find a note from Roxy, telling him to rest and take the next day off. At that point, he asked his greedy sword why he felt so poorly. The greedy sword explained that the gluttony skill doesn't stop once it tastes the essence of souls, meaning he would be compelled to hunt souls to eat them until he dies. Ignoring that would leave him starving to death or losing control and attacking anyone in his way. Vit thought this was impossible because he didn't want to be a monster. The greedy sword told him that when his hunger peaked, it would show in his eyes. Vite looked at himself in the mirror and confirmed this. The greedy sword insisted there was no escape now, and urged him to go out and hunt monsters to earn money. On the way, Vite asked if his red eye color was due to hunger. The greedy sword confirmed this, adding that this color would allow him to see better at night, and would make prey fear him and freeze in place. Vite reached a goblin area and killed a group of them, but wasn't satisfied, so he went to the hobgoblin forest, drawing his sword at every goblin he encountered until he finally felt satisfied and his eye color returned to normal. The greedy sword advised him to continue killing monsters from time to time, so he wouldn't reach that stage again. Suddenly, the Goblin King appeared, and the forest shook violently with his presence. At that moment, Vite decided to take on the Goblin King. He hid, then quickly jumped at him, but the Goblin King looked imposing. Vite tried to retreat, but the greedy sword reassured him that there was nothing to fear, asking him to trust him. Encouraged, Vite charged at the Goblin King, driving his sword into his body. That's when Vite's health regeneration skill activated. The greedy sword surprised him by saying that if he granted it those skills, it could give him new abilities. Vite asked what he would do with those skills, and the greedy sword replied that it would take on a new form. Vite asked how many skills it wanted, and the greedy sword insisted on having everything it had gained since they met. If Vite didn't grant those skills, it would lose the right to bear them. Vite had no choice but to grant the greedy sword its skills. At that moment, the greedy sword took on the form of a magical bow and told Vite that someone had been watching him for a long time, so they needed to shoot an arrow now. Vite asked where he would get an arrow right now. The greedy sword ordered him to just pull back the bow, and arrows would appear on their own. Vite followed the command immediately and hit the target. The next day, Vite caught Roxy disguised and asked her why she was dressed like that and if she was going to the castle in such a way. Roxy whispered to him that she was heading to town on a secret inspection mission, which Vite said explained her disguise. She then told him not to tell anyone, especially Haro. Roxy remembered Haro's advice to act like a grown-up from the Hart family. Vite understood and apologized to Roxy, saying he would get back to work, but then she suddenly grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, saying she would take him with her as her escort. Roxy walked quickly, leaving Vite behind. He asked her to slow down a bit. The greedy one, pointing out that calling Roxy Miss would attract attention, chimed in. At the same time, Roxy asked him to say the same thing to Vite. The greedy one arrogantly claimed he had advised him that before. Vite told him to shut up. Roxy then asked him who he was talking to, and Vite apologized, asking her not to worry about it. Roxy questioned why he didn't just call her Roki instead of Roxy. The greedy one noted that the name wasn't far off from her real name. Vite told him again to shut up, causing Roxy to feel sad, thinking he was referring to her as shut up. She apologized, saying she could be annoying. Vite reassured her that she wasn't the one he meant. Roxy admitted she was really excited to be going out with him, making Vite blush, while the greedy one provocatively remarked about the days of youth. Vite got angry at him, but Roxy stopped him, saying she wouldn't allow him to treat his sword roughly. Vite apologized, while Roxy mentioned that she hadn't had a look at his sword before. In a panicked glance, Vite looked at the greedy sword and recalled the greedy one's earlier words about gluttony skills and the taste of souls. He thought to himself that he shouldn't let Roxy discover the gluttony skill, but Roxy surprised him by skillfully taking the sword from him. She then apologized for being curious about it. After examining the sword, she told him it needed more care and that she would inform the Hart family blacksmith to take care of it. Then she handed the sword back and asked him to continue with their work. Vite followed Roxy, telling the greedy one he was happy for him now that someone would take care of him, but the greedy one didn't reply and told him to be quiet because he was enjoying Roxy's lovely scent. Vite jealously mentioned he might need to get rid of him and throw him away, but Roxy suddenly turned to him, asking him to hurry up. Vite quickly followed her until they reached the market, where Roxy stopped in front of some grapes. The seller then told her these grapes had just been picked from the Hart family farm that morning. Roxy asked to try one, and the seller handed her two. Vite tasted one and said admiringly that it was delicious. Roxy told him, of course, it was delicious since it was grown on their land. At that moment, the seller caught on to what Roxy said. Roxy put her hand over her mouth in embarrassment, while Vite saved her with the greedy one's quick thinking, telling the seller that a relative of Roxy worked on the Hart family farm. The seller understood the situation, while Roxy whispered to Vite that he had saved her cleverly. The greedy one then told him he owed him one, and Vite replied that he knew. Roxy asked him what was going on, and Vite told her he was just talking to himself. Suddenly all the eyes in the market turned toward one of the Holy Knights, and people began whispering that since the death of Mr. Myson, the Holy Knights had been out of control in their actions. As the Holy Knight walked by Roxy and Vite, the greedy one said it was a perfect time for a fight. Vite told him to shut up, but the knight overheard him and approached Vite, questioning if he was the one who said that. Vite apologized, but the knight continued in anger, trying to stomp on Vite's head until Roxy intervened, saying that Vite had already apologized. The knight then asked her how she dared to respond to a holy knight. Before Roxy could answer, the knight said he remembered her from somewhere and then recognized her. At that moment, Vite realized Roxy was about to be revealed to everyone, and the greedy one whispered to him that they should pretend they were lovers. Vite, surprised, repeated, "Lovers?" At that moment, Roxy grabbed him, saying it was a good idea, and they pretended to be in love. She then apologized to the Holy Knight, who looked very surprised. Roxy left with Veet as people commented on how it's impossible for her to be the Lady Roxy. Everyone began to disperse while Roxy held Veet's hand, watching the people's reactions from a distance. Veet heard her inner voice saying she had never held a man's hand like this before, so he immediately pulled away. Roxy then stood in front of a gem dealer, and Veet was stunned when she told him that, of course, as a girl, she was drawn to the gemstones. She pointed to several raw stones and asked the dealer if they were gems too. The dealer replied that you couldn't tell if they contained gems until they were open. Roxy examined them curiously, and the dealer informed her that one could be bought for 10 copper coins, asking if she wanted to try her luck. Roxy replied that she was bad at luck. Then Veet started taking a look at the stones using his identification skill, and at that moment, he was surprised to see Roxy holding a gem and inspecting it closely. The dealer guessed she liked it and told Veet he would give him a discount if he wanted to buy it for his girl, but Roxy returned it to its place, thanking the dealer for letting her have a look. The dealer asked if she didn't like it, and she said she didn't think she would ever use it, and then she continued on her way. Veet caught up with her and asked if she didn't have any acquaintances among the warriors. She replied that she had questions for the current warriors, not the retired ones. Suddenly, they overheard passers-by talking about the dead goblins. One person said they died because of a wandering monster, while another remarked that couldn't be true. How could the orphanage in the poor neighborhood have goblin ears as a donation? Roxy then stopped the speaker and asked him to tell her more about this matter since she was investigating the wandering monster that had recently appeared near the capital. After that, Veet took Roxy to a tavern and introduced her to the bartender as Roki, his co-worker. The bartender told her to take care of him and told Veet he was amazed to see him alive with his girlfriend after all this time. Veet corrected him, saying she wasn't his girlfriend. The bartender apologized, saying he misunderstood. Moments later, the bartender mentioned he had heard about a warrior finding a mountain of goblin corpses, with their ears still attached, and making a lot of money from that. Roxy asked why the killer couldn't be a wandering monster. The bartender replied it was impossible. If there were a mysterious creature roaming around, travelers would spread the word. Suddenly, an old man entered the tavern, saying there was a popular theory that the wandering monster was a leech. Roxy worriedly responded that this monster would pose a big threat to citizens. The old man assured her that the Holy Knights would take care of it right away. In that moment, Veet was shocked and wondered what would happen if Roxy joined the hunt and saw him kill the goblin. Soon after, other warriors entered the tavern, and one approached Roxy, asking her to join him and enjoy his company. Roxy immediately stood up and pushed the man away using her skills. Then one of the warriors remarked that only a holy knight could perform such a move. Roxy took out her hair tie, and the bartender recognized her right away, repeating, "Lady Roxy." Roxy apologized for deceiving him at first, and at that moment, the warriors bowed before her, asking for her forgiveness. One offered her money, but she rejected it, stating that the holy knights were meant to protect people and create a world where they could laugh with the kingdom's subjects, just as her father dreamt. The old man then remarked that Roxy was just like her father. After that, Roxy sat chatting with the warriors. Later, she took Veet to get his greedy sword repaired, and he thanked her for that. She told him she learned a lot about the wandering monster thanks to him. Veet asked her why she didn't know about the hunt then. Roxy guessed to herself that the Valeric family was handling it and hadn't informed her. Suddenly, Roxy and Veet heard the three siblings teasing a child, so Roxy ran to the source of the noise, asking them to leave the kid alone. One of the siblings told her they were taking a lost child to protect him. Roxy ordered Veet to take the child, and he did. Then she asked Raval why he hadn't told her about the hunt for the wandering monster. He justified that he thought she was busy with her father's death. The three siblings left, and the child said he hated the Holy Knights. Roxy apologized, and he asked why she was apologizing. Veet asked if the child was lost, and he told him he couldn't find his mother. The two then began searching for the child's mother. At that moment, Veet remembered when he had gotten lost 5 years ago, and a holy knight had taken care of him too. Soon after, the mother found her child, and the kid bid them farewell. Then Veet returned home, thinking of a way to hunt monsters without Roxy finding out. He decided to wear a mask. The next day, Veet went to Roxy and presented her with a raw gem as a token of gratitude for giving him a job. Roxy told him she was very happy with his gift. Veet quickly went goblin hunting while wearing his mask, and warriors soon described him as the Lich, causing them all to flee the area. The next day, Roxy met Veet as he was doing his job. She told him that she had a secret mission for him, and then took him on a tour in her carriage. She pointed to a certain area and said it belonged to the Hart family. Veet admired the place and asked her if he would be picking grapes. She explained that she wanted to see the grapes up close after seeing them sold at the market that day. The carriage stopped at the family home, and Roxy ran to her mother, who had gotten out of bed to welcome her. When Roxy scolded her for this, her mother said she was feeling much better that day and asked about the person who accompanied Roxy. Roxy replied that he was a servant she had recently hired. tired, and she brought him along to introduce him to everyone. Veet then introduced himself to her mother, bowing respectfully. She told him her name was Aisha Hart, welcomed him, and said it was kind of him to visit them. Veet thanked her, and while he thought to himself that she was a nice woman, Aisha called him over and asked if he liked Roxy. Roxy shouted at her mother, wondering why she suddenly asked Veet about that, and where that notion of liking came from. Aisha explained that she was curious about how Veet saw his boss. This left Veet and Roxy shocked as they misunderstood each other. Veet then bowed to Aisha and told her he cared deeply for Roxy and wished to serve her until the end of his life. At that moment, Roxy ran to her room, claiming she needed to rest. Veet wondered if he had said something wrong. Aisha told him that Roxy always ran away when things got uncomfortable. She continued by saying that Roxy had cried a lot as a child and would make quite a fuss over seeing a small bug. Then, Aisha expressed her concern for Roxy, stating that she couldn't believe she had become a holy knight. She feared her daughter might be putting too much pressure on herself. Veet assured her that Roxy was an excellent holy knight and that people trusted her a lot, adding that she was performing her duties diligently as the head of the Hart family. In Roxy's room, she looked at her belongings and recalled when her father taught her how to hold a sword. He had told her he couldn't believe she wanted to become a holy knight. Roxy assured him that her goal was to be a holy knight and laugh with the people. Her father had responded with admiration, saying that was Veeting for the Hart family. The events continued as Veet worked in the grape farm alongside the workers. One of the workers offered him freshly pressed grape juice, saying it would relieve his fatigue. The worker proudly mentioned that the lords had helped on that farm for generations until they were able to achieve that delicious grape flavor. Veet then asked if Lord Mason had also contributed to that. The worker sadly replied that he had heard Lord Mason died in Gallia, and his death must have been heartbreaking for Lady Roxy, which is why they weren't sure she would come to the farm that year. Veet then inquired if Roxy helped with the harvest every year. The worker confirmed this, but also pointed out that she came to hunt monsters, as it was the harvest season for most crops, which meant many monsters would appear looking for food. The worker pointed toward the valley to the north and said they were facing the kobold monster in that area. At that moment, Veet's stomach growled, and the worker remarked that he must be hungry after all that work. The scene changed, and Roxy ordered Veet to go home without her, as she still had a lot to do on the farm. Veet continued on his way home when a woman crossed his path. He stopped, and when he looked at her, he noticed her eyes were as red as his when he gets greedy. Veet lost his focus for a moment, and the woman asked if he was listening to her, then continued on, saying she must have come early. Veet asked early for what, and she said she had come to hunt the kobold. She then turned her back on him and told him he could hunt her instead, which would leave him in debt to her. The greedy Veet asked who the woman was, feeling she knew something. At that moment, Roxy caught up with Veet, looking at the woman and saying she seemed to be from Gallia. Veet questioned if Gallia hadn't been destroyed, and Roxy confirmed it had, saying that 1,000 years ago, Gallia was a great military power, but was overwhelmed by a wave of monsters that led to the nation's collapse. Veet replied that there might still be survivors, but Roxy stated she hadn't met a pureblood Gallian yet. Veet then walked alongside Roxy and asked if she would be okay alone while hunting monsters. She told him she was a holy knight, and she'd also have warriors working with her. After that, the kobold monsters destroyed all the grape crops, so Roxy and her men lay in wait to take down the kobolds. When Veet spotted a kobold, he started drooling, while the warriors said they had no chance against that monster. Roxy told them she would capture and kill it, and instructed the workers to find a safe place until then, while she ordered the warriors to prepare for battle. One warrior told her they would need a day to get ready, and at that moment, Veet told himself that facing a level 50 monster was beyond his current abilities, but he couldn't ignore what was happening in Heart's lands. At night, Veet went to fight the kobold monsters, where greed transformed him into a bow, and he began shooting his arrows at the kobolds non-stop until the kobold king caught one of his arrows. Veet pulled back his arrow and lunged at the kobold king quickly, but the king struck him in the shoulder and then exhaled a strange energy that knocked Veet into a lake, leaving him unconscious. However, Veet pretended to be unconscious, and as a second kobold approached him, he suddenly got up and stabbed the kobold in the mouth. But the kobold king was still waiting for him. The greedy one then asked Veet to charge him with the power he had just obtained from the kobold he killed, and he transformed into a deadly and powerful weapon. Together, they defeated the kobold king, but worse, Veet fell into a frenzy from eating a monster that overwhelmed him for the first time. The greedy one urged him to hold on and not lose himself, warning that if he did, he would fall into a worse state than extreme hunger. The next day, Roxy examined the area and discovered some magical arrows. Afterward, she went home and discussed it with her mother and Veet, saying she'd seen a woman from Gallia days before who was one of the strongest holy knights, and she suspected she was the reason for the kobold's death. After that, Aisha called Veet to her room and asked him to stay close to her daughter and support her, assuring him that she felt he had the desire in his heart to be by Roxy's side. Aisha then elaborated that she had been a common girl with ordinary skills but had supported her husband. Still, she believed Roxy faced some challenges since only one of her parents was a holy knight. Aisha then broke down in tears, telling Veet that her days were numbered, so she wanted him to support Roxy in her stead. Veet agreed to her request. Then he and Roxy headed back to the capital. He struggled to suppress his greed, since hunting goblins no longer satisfied his hunger after devouring the kobold. The greedy one reminded him that time was running out and he needed to find an alternative to satisfy his appetite before it was too late. Veet went to the tavern to think of a solution, where the old man Ed said that Mr. Hato would join the mission to hunt the lich. The bartender speculated that Hato was seeking quick glory through that mission, and the old man scoffed, suggesting the Holy Knights send Hato on a Gallia mission to become food for the monsters. Veet then wondered why there was a second mission to Gallia when Mr. Mason had just died. The old man replied that nothing had been decided yet. Not long after, Roxy knelt before her father's grave asking for his blessings, as she was chosen to go to Gallia. At that moment, Veet's voice came to her, begging her not to go there, or she might never return. She told him she had made her decision. On the other side, Mamel was celebrating the trap they set for Roxy to go to Gallia to get rid of her since she was a nuisance to them. Meanwhile, Hado told Mamel and Rafal that he wished to go with them to Tenburn. Mamel replied that it was a mission to seek immortality, not a trip. In the evening, Veet went fishing as usual, but Hadu and his friends blocked his way. Then, Hadu's companions asked him to deal with Veet, and Hadu allowed them. Some of them rushed at Veet with their swords, but Veet took them down while the others fled, despite Hadu warning them not to run away. At that moment, Hadu drew his sword and told Veet that he was just a beast, and that he wouldn't escape. Veet removed his mask and revealed his head covering, shocking Hadu, who wondered how a scum like Veet could have such strength. Veet told him he wasn't obliged to explain anything, but Hadu arrogantly asked if he knew who he was dealing with, boasting that he was the second son of the Fleric family and a holy knight. This provoked Veet, who challenged him to show off the power of the holy knight he was so proud of. At that moment, Hadu curiously asked himself how Veet gained such power, while Veet questioned his greedy sword about whether it could destroy a holy sword. The greedy sword replied that it was impossible for a holy sword made of orichalcum to be better than it, and told Veet to strike as he wished, while Hadu called him a fool and questioned if he was really going to fight from such a distance. When Hadu charged at Veet and began summoning the power of the holy sword, he was shocked to see Veet split his sword in half without warning. Hadu exclaimed, "That's a holy sword! It can't happen!" Veet threw the remains of the holy sword in front of him and ordered him to pick it up. Hadu tried to flee, but Veet cornered him, saying he thought he was a true holy knight, but instead was pathetic. Veet began to remember when Hadu used to beat him in the past, and swiftly dragged him, teaching him a lesson, slamming him from one rock to another. Hadu pleaded for Veet to let him go, but Veet asked how he could simply plead after treating others like insects and contributing to sending Roxy into danger. Hadu begged again, but Veet ignored him and insisted on punishing him. Then his greedy sword transformed into the figure of a mighty phoenix, releasing strange light energy. Soon, the lights faded, revealing that Hadu couldn't move, yet he was amazed that Veet hadn't killed him. Veet informed him he had questions, to which Hadu wondered if they were about Roxy. Veet then told him that Roxy chose to go to Gallia to save the citizens. At that point, Veet raised his sword against Hadu, telling him he would cancel Roxy's mission to Gallia but didn't want to kill him. Hadu urged Veet not to do anything foolish in revenge for Roxy, but Veet stabbed the sword into Hadu's chest, saying that this revenge was for him. At that moment, Veet gained the skill of the holy sword technique, and the greedy sword told him that he was now a holy knight. Quickly, Veet transferred his stats to the greedy sword, which then took on a new form, a blade that could cut through anything to oblivion. Events unfolded, and Roxy began preparing to go to Gallia. Before getting into her carriage, Roxy looked at her servants and assured them that there was no need for their desperate looks, emphasizing that the 3 years would pass quickly. She approached Haru and asked her to take care of things in her absence, while Haru also asked Roxy to serve honorably as the chief of the Hart family. Roxy then said goodbye to Oliver and Minerva, who wished her good luck. She stood to bid farewell to Veet, saying they would meet again. Veet asked her to take care of herself, and Roxy mounted her horse and left. Later, Haru handed Veet a recommendation letter from Roxy, leaving it for him in case he wished to work at another castle, which would put him far from the Fleric family. Veet took the letter and noted that Roxy cared about him until the end, but he couldn't accept it, as he would carve his own path as a warrior from now on. Afterward, Veet returned home and set about preparing for his journey, stating that since he couldn't stop Roxy from going to Gallia, he could at least support her. The next day, Veet said goodbye to everyone at the Hart Castle. Haru gave him money for his work along with a severance bonus. Veet told her that the money seemed a lot, but she replied that he shouldn't forget the pride that comes with serving the Hart family, then wished him good luck. Afterward, Veet went to say goodbye to the bartender and old man Ad, saying he had to go to Gallia. Somewhere, Roxy announced to the Holy Knights that she had taken the position of her father, Mason Hart, and that they would head to defeat the holy dragon that had awakened after a 1,000-year slumber. They would also protect protect the royal capital, Sayfort, and its people. After Roxy finished speaking, she met a girl named Miria, who told her that she would be with her wherever she went. Then, another person named Mogan approached. Mogan volunteered to go to Galia as well, and then Miria teased him, saying that people like him get excited to see the live natural disaster, the sacred dragon. She accused him of only wanting to find a chance to test his abilities. Mogan replied that he couldn't deny that most warriors look for opportunities to see how far their skills can take them. Miria called him a foolish warrior, and then Roxy told her she was going too far. Mogan explained that he volunteered mainly because of Mr. Mason, under whom he had worked before, and he wanted to take revenge for him. Roxy thanked him and asked if his family wouldn't mind him going to Galia. Mogan responded that his daughter Rainey asked him to bring back some relics from Galia. Roxy was astonished and asked, "Relics?" Mogan said he came from a long line of researchers and was the only warrior among them. Meanwhile, the researcher in the lab was telling Rainey about the goblin samples killed by the lich known as the Corpse, saying that the arrows that hit the goblin were not ordinary arrows. Rainey looked at the samples thoughtfully and said they were magical arrows. Then she searched in one of the books and said that those magical arrows are in a black sword, which is one of the deadly sin weapons. The researcher asked her what the deadly sins meant, and Rainey replied that she didn't know. Rainey wished to see one of those deadly sin weapons. On the other side, the driver of the carriage that Veet was on announced they were about to arrive in Tetra, a city where the best goods in the south are gathered. Veet got off in Tetra and told Greedy that Tetra hadn't changed much. He had passed through it 5 years ago on his way to the capital. After that, Veet met a carriage captain and asked him if he was headed to Galia. The driver replied that he would go tomorrow because if he moved now, monsters would attack him at night, asking him to return in the morning. At that moment, Greedy suggested they eat and gather information until morning, and perhaps he could also buy a new sheath since Veet had acquired the holy sword technique. Veet agreed with his suggestion. Meanwhile, there was a man offering money to warriors to save his village and hunt monsters, but one of the warriors mocked him and started humiliating him. Just then, Veet arrived and pushed the warrior away. Another warrior attempted to attack Veet, but he defended himself. The man thanked Veet for saving him, and Veet told him he hadn't seen him in a while, calling him Sit. He then remembered how Sit and the other kids used to bully him, accusing him of being a failure and throwing stones at him. At that time, Veet turned to studying herbal medicine after he found that his father was often injured from hunting monsters. Then one day, his father died, and Veet sat crying at his father's grave, but the villagers showed no mercy, telling him to leave because he was a failure, and they started throwing stones at him. In the current moment, Sit knelt before Veet, asking for his help. Sit was the son of the village chief who had caused Veet's exile from the village in the past. Veet was silent for a moment, and Greedy told him that he needed to curb his greed, which would work in his favor. Veet agreed to take care of the village's monsters. Then Sit took Veet with him to the village. There, the villagers commented that Sit had brought back the garbage they exiled from the village in the past, and couldn't even hire real warriors. Sit replied that he had seen Veet's strength with his own eyes, and that Veet had become a strong warrior. At that point, someone said he would bring another warrior tomorrow. Another replied that they had been hearing screams from the nearby forest since yesterday, and they might not last until tomorrow. Their leader decided to use Veet as a sacrifice until morning. Sit asked Veet to ignore their words and just let it pass. Sit then hosted Veet at his home and apologized. Veet told him that he was used to it and asked about his wife. Sit told him that the monsters had gotten to her. Then Sit's daughter appeared, and she told Veet that she realized she needed to change since the birth of her daughter. She told him she could see that he had indeed changed. Then she asked him about the monsters, and Sit informed him that the monsters had appeared a month ago and that they could fly. The villagers had decided to hire warriors because the monsters did not resemble those they had dealt with before. Soon, Veet's stomach growled, and Sit went to bring food while Greedy mentioned they were dealing with gargoyle monsters, which are known for their intelligence. Suddenly, Sit's daughter asked Veet who he was talking to, and he told her he was talking to himself. Then the little girl gave Veet candy. Shortly after, Sit returned with food, and Veet ate it, quickly losing consciousness. At that moment, the little girl confessed to her father that she had fed Veet the candy her grandfather had given her, and Sit understood that Veet had taken a narcotic candy. At the same time, the gargoyle monsters launched an attack on the village, while Veet was unconscious despite Sit's efforts to wake him. The leader then began calling his followers to bring Veet, so they could present him as a sacrifice to the monsters. Meanwhile, Sait prepared an antidote to revive Veet. After Veet drank the antidote, he woke up and Sait apologized, explaining that his father had drugged him. Veet asked him to stay inside the house before drawing his sword and stepping out, only to find the gargoyle monsters setting the entire village on fire, turning the place into a nightmare. Veet stood frozen in fear before a gargoyle that was breathing fire like a fireball. Sait then suggested Veet use the great scythe weapon. Surprisingly, Veet's sword, Greedy, transformed into the great scythe, allowing him to split the gargoyle in two. He also gained the fireball skill. By that time, Veet had defeated the gargoyle, leaving only their leader, who had fireball and fire resistance skills. Sait told Veet the leader would get close to unleash a fireball at him, and that would be their chance to attack. Indeed, the gargoyle leader approached to breathe fire, but Veet jumped up and struck him down with the great scythe. In that moment, Veet gained fire resistance skill. The next day, Sate and Veet surveyed the devastation caused by the gargoyle monsters. Sate mentioned that his father had died, and only he and a few villagers survived, meaning the village was finished. Veet picked up some herbs and said they wouldn't be able to grow anything anymore. Sate asked if he could use the identification skill, and Veet confirmed it. Sate then wondered why Veet chose to become a warrior since he could earn a lot using that skill. Veet told him that he had no choice but to fight. At that moment, Sate expressed his regret over what he had done to Veet in the past, and asked Veet to hit him to atone for it. Greedy reminded him that Sate would not find peace until Veet did that. Veet then punched Sate hard in the face, and Sate thanked him. Veet then told him to take care of his daughter before going to his father's grave. He admitted that he hated seeing the village disappear despite all of its flaws. Meanwhile, Miria was telling Roxy that they were approaching the village of Lancaster. Roxy responded that they would look into resupplying once they got there, while Mogan warned her about the Lord of Lancaster. Roxy asked what he meant, and Mogan said she would see for herself when they arrived. At the same time, the carriage driver was chatting with Veet, telling him he yawned a lot and reminding him he would pay him 3 gold coins, so he needed to rely on him. Veet reassured him not to worry. He might not look like a warrior, but he was a good fighter, comparable to a novice holy knight. Suddenly, a group of bandits blocked the carriage driver's path, demanding he hand over valuable items if he valued his life. Veet jumped down to confront them, inviting them to face him first. The carriage driver clung to Veet's neck, begging for help since he had a wife and 2 children aged 6 and 7. Veet told him to move aside as he couldn't fight like that. At that moment, the bandit leader declared that their prey trembled in fear and ordered his men to take them out. But suddenly, a massive axe flew in, taking down all the bandits. Then, the same woman with red eyes appeared, telling Veet he owed her for a kobold kill and asked the carriage driver to take her along. He agreed, but as soon as she got into the carriage, it almost tipped over. The woman commanded her weapon to return to its original form, instantly changing the weight of the weapon. Inside the carriage, the woman recognized Veet and said, "So you are greedy, Veet." He asked how she knew that, and she replied that she had a skill from the deadly sins too. Veet was surprised and asked if Greedy hadn't told him about it. She introduced herself as Main the Wrath, and quickly mentioned she was hungry. Veet gave her some dried meat, which she devoured immediately, even eating Veet's portion. In Lancaster, a girl was walking when 2 monsters crossed her path. A holy knight intervened and defeated them. The girl asked his name, and he introduced himself as the Lord of Lancaster, Rudolph. At the same time, Veet arrived in Lancaster and witnessed Rudolph's display. The carriage driver commented that Lord Rudolph was preparing to welcome a Gallia mission, shocking Veet, because it was the mission that Roxy was part of. The driver then stretched out his hand for the 3 gold coins that Veet had promised, but Main snatched them, saying she was the one who saved him. The driver left while Main fell asleep on Veet's arm while standing. He had to carry her, and as he walked, he was surprised to see the citizens welcoming him, thinking he was a holy knight. He wondered if they respected holy knights in this town. Veet continued walking until he reached an area that only citizens could enter, but someone quickly came and allowed Veet to pass. At that moment, Veet noticed that everyone he met had different marks on their necks. He asked Greedy about it, and Greedy guessed that the marks were probably to distinguish between social classes. On the other hand, Rudolph was punishing one of the warriors who had run away from hunting the monsters, asking him if his goal was to humiliate him. He emphasized that his ultimate aim was to become better than the Hart family and then killed the warrior. Meanwhile, Veet was sitting on the bed opposite Mine and asking Greedy how he knew Mine. Greedy replied that they were old acquaintances who met from time to time. The same went for laziness, which was Mine's weapon, since both belonged to the deadly sin weapons. Veet asked him about these deadly sins, and Greedy listed them: gluttony, wrath, greed, sloth, lust, envy, and finally, pride. Greedy explained that these skills were born from challenging divine laws, which is why they are called deadly sin weapons. He noted that gluttony is considered one of the sins, prompting Veet to wonder why he had that skill since he had been bullied all the time. When he thought he had gained power, he was surprised to find that he had to fight just to survive, questioning the benefit of that skill. Greedy told him he needed to stay strong, or gluttony would consume him one day. He clarified that the key to resisting it was to keep himself close to hunger and to satisfy his greed slowly. Veet later went to hunt a sand monster. He shot a fireball from his bow with an arrow and hit the sand monster, but he was surprised by several other sand monsters. Meanwhile, Mine woke up in the inn, feeling hungry. She wandered downstairs and was surprised to see a bounty for anyone who defeated a sand golem. At that moment, someone mentioned that even Lord Rudolph could not defeat the sand golem, warning that if the sand golem remained alive, people would keep dying. Meanwhile, Veet succeeded in defeating the sand golem, while Greedy informed him he could smell a crowned monster, which might become a special dish tonight. There were several warriors trapped by that monster, not knowing how to deal with it. Suddenly, Veet appeared and shot a fireball from his bow, claiming that the monster was his prey. A warrior warned him that he couldn't defeat it alone, but Veeth didn't care. The monster quickly aimed fireballs at Veeth, yet he dodged them. Greedy then notified him that the monster would start to create a sandstorm and would try to crush him with rocks after pulling him inside. At that point, Veeth transformed Greedy into the Great Reaper weapon and prepared to attack the monster. Veeth then fell onto the monster with the Great Reaper, causing the monster's core to drop into the sand. Veeth transformed his weapon again into the Gear Falcon and destroyed the monster's core in the sand, gaining the sandstorm skill. The warriors noted that they had never seen a fighter who could create such chaos. One of them approached Veeth to thank him for saving them, introducing himself as Bard. Veeth remarked that he could also call him the Corpses. When Veeth returned to the inn, he found Mine preparing to hunt the sand golem. He shocked her by saying he had already defeated it. Mine screamed that he took her reward, and Veeth calmed her down, promising to give her half of what he would take. They then went together to claim the reward, which was 100 gold coins. Suddenly, Veeth was cornered by Lord Rudolph and his men, who demanded that Veeth become his servant from now on since he had defeated the sand golem. Rudolph insisted that he had no right to refuse. Mine approached him and said that she got Veeth first, but Rudolph mocked her, saying a girl like her should stay home and drink her mother's milk. Mine then swung her axe at him, creating a hole in the wall that Rudolph flew through. When Veeth reprimanded her for what she did, she told him that she wasn't a child. Then, Veeth traveled with Mane in the cart and asked her, puzzled, if she was sure she had the skill of anger rather than gluttony, emphasizing that they had just bought that food supply, and yet she finished it. Mane replied that anger needs a lot of calories, which made Veeth wonder where all the food she ate went. At that moment, Mane got really angry, and her fury was so intense that it burst the cart's wheels. They stopped, and the driver began to fix the cart while Mane wandered around the village. Veeth went to find her but noticed the children playing non-stop, so he guessed the village was peaceful, even though it was close to Gallia, which was thought to be more dangerous due to the monster threats. Then Veeth spotted a castle and wondered about it. Greedy informed him that it was Hausen. Veeth expressed surprise, saying he thought only Seafort had a castle. Veeth approached someone to ask about the mayor, explaining that he wanted to spend some time in the village. The man turned to him and said he was the leader there. Veeth noticed that the leader had a holy sword and guessed he was defending the village. The leader then surprised Veeth by saying he wanted to duel him, assuring him that if he won, he could stay in the village. The leader explained to Veeth that he had just discovered his skill, and even though he was level 1, his stats exceeded 2 million. Veeth was shocked and asked the leader when he realized his skills. The leader drew his sword and, seriously, asked if Veeth would duel him or not. Veeth immediately drew his sword as well, and they began their duel, but the leader was quicker and knocked the Greedy sword from Veeth's hand. The leader then sheathed his sword, and Veeth picked Greedy up from the ground, telling the leader he understood he was not allowed to stay in the village for now. However, the leader told him he was welcome, but only if he trained under him while staying in the village. Veeth asked why he wanted to train him, and the leader replied that it was just a whim of an old man. He explained to Veeth that he didn't know how to deal with recognition and wasn't fully benefiting from his other skills. When the leader told Veeth that he felt his body couldn't handle its new strength yet, Veeth was stunned. The leader added that he wouldn't lose anything by following his guidance. Veeth pondered for a moment and thought to himself that he doesn't meet a holy knight every day, plus the man was willing to teach him for free. Veeth then bowed to the leader and introduced himself, who told him his name was Haroon. Just then, Mane arrived and Haroon asked Veeth if she was his companion. Veeth confirmed it, and Haroon quickly examined her, saying she was indeed a high-level warrior. At that moment, Mane pointed to a spot, telling Veeth they could camp there. Veeth replied that he had already found a place to stay. After that, events unfolded, and while Mane was sleeping in her bed, Haroon was teaching Veeth hand-to-hand combat first, as well as how to manage his stats. Haroon told Veeth that he was aware he was struggling with that. Veeth was shocked, and Haroon explained that all warriors who gain sudden strength face this problem. Haroon then started to give Veeth instructions on how to manage his stats, asking him to stay calm and relax well, because the more tense he was, the weaker his movements became. Haroon explained that relaxation generates a great subconscious strength in a warrior. At that moment, Mane woke up and sat watching them from a distance, complaining that she was hungry while Veeth was giving his all during training. Suddenly, one of Veeth's eyes changed color, and he felt a rush of gluttony. Haroon noticed and asked if something was wrong with him, but Veeth ignored the question and began to move faster and immerse himself more in the training. Haroon told him he was moving faster now. Veeth replied that Haroon was a good teacher. Haroon quickly moved and tried to kick Veeth, but Veeth was faster and dodged the kick. The training ended, and Haroon said they would move on to actual combat exercises tomorrow. Then, Haroon went into the house. Meanwhile, Veeth smelled a monster and guessed there was a beast in the castle, but he heard Haroon calling out, so he immediately went to him, surprised to find Mane asleep on the floor after causing a mess and spilling food everywhere. Veeth apologized to Haroon, who told him he would ask the villagers to share their food with them. After Haroon went out to look for food, Veet was taken aback by seeing Haroon with his son and wife. Then, Greedy remarked that Haroon's son resembled Veet. Veet guessed there must be a reason for Haroon to be the village chief in such a remote place. The next day, Haroon tossed a stick to Veet and asked him to block his sword attacks with that stick. Veet told him the stick would definitely break. Haroon replied that he needed to figure it out. Haroon quickly charged at Veet with the sword, but Veet managed to block it with the stick without breaking it. Haroon seriously stated that Veet was now able to control his stats. After that, Veet sat at the table to eat with Haroon, who asked if he would be leaving tomorrow. Veet confirmed this, thanking Haroon for his hospitality toward him and Main, and asked Main to thank him as well. However, Main was wolfing down her food. Veet apologized to Haroon for Main's behavior, to which Haroon said he had plenty of meat and vegetables and suggested Veet let Main eat until she was full. After that, Veet noticed Haroon constantly looking toward Hausen Castle and asked him why. Haroon told him it was his castle, but he had to flee from it 15 years ago on royal orders, as his family and people fell victim to a crowned monster. Since then, Hausen had been under the control of Lord Lich, the harbinger of death, and his family remained in his grip. At that moment, Veet suddenly stood up and told Haroon he needed to go out for a while. Haroon followed him, guessing he was headed to the castle, and told him he would join him. Then Main came from behind and told them she would protect the village while they were gone for 50 gold coins. Soon Veet and Haroon went to the castle, where Haroon was surprised Veet managed to take someone down with magic arrows enhanced by petrification from the sandstorm skill. Haroon commented that this technique was no longer studied in the capital due to its complexity. The two continued to advance, and numerous skeletons surrounded them, and they both showcased their skills to fight against those skeletons. Once inside the castle, Haroon was astonished to find it full of life as if nothing had happened, and even his wife and son welcomed him. Haroon approached them and asked if they were alive. His son Luke asked what he meant, while his wife Diana said he was surely tired. Luke asked if Haroon had completed the task the king assigned him, and Haroon confirmed he had. Veet, puzzled, then asked what was happening. Greedy answered that it was an illusion spell. Those people might look alive, but they were actually dead. Veet was horrified to discover it was all an illusion. Meanwhile, Veet was shocked to see Luke trying to stab Haroon with a sword. He called out to Haroon in alarm, but Haroon reassured him that he was strong. Luke stepped back, telling Haroon he deserved to die for abandoning them and leaving for the call of duty in the capital. Because of that, he had to protect the castle and the people in his absence until the monsters got to them. Haroon fell silent while Luke asked him why he came back just to kill them when they were still alive. Veet tried to take control of the situation, but Haroon asked him to let him deal with his family. Veet then went off in search of Lich while Haroon fought Luke in a sword duel. On the other side, Veet found Lich's location. He charged at him, but was shocked to see that Lich controlled the corpses, forcing them to surround Veet. He felt a bit tense, but soon Haroon came to him, apologizing and dropping some corpses, saying he had severed their limbs to disable them. Haroon quickly drew his sword and summoned the power of the Greater Cross, creating a huge flash to repel Lich. Veet then urged Haroon to combine his sword with his as well to eliminate Lich faster. Haroon agreed, and their swords fused, unleashing immense energy. After that, the scene changed, and Haroon sat before the corpse of his son and wife, apologizing to them for taking so long to free them from their suffering. Their spirits then appeared and told him he had saved them in the end. Haroon asked for their forgiveness and bid farewell to their spirits, asking them to wait for him until he joined them. After Haroon finished saying goodbye, he told Veet there were still skeletons he needed to deal with, and Veet joined him. They then returned late to Main, who scolded them. Veet calmed her down while Haroon gave her more money than she asked for. Veet called her a greedy mercenary. She told him one needs money to rebuild an entire village, and he'd know that if he lived long enough. Haroon then remembered he had seen Main 50 years ago when the monsters first appeared, telling her she hadn't changed since then and still had a sharp look. She replied that perhaps he would catch up to her level after a millennium, pointing out that she was a specter not allowed to die. Veet then asked in surprise, "Spectre?" Main continued saying he should repay her now. At that moment, Haroon instructed Veet to return to him once he completed his mission because he wanted to tell him something important. On the other hand, Rafal and Mamil returned from their journey, and Mamil said that the Philosopher's Stone could cure any disease or injury, but she didn't think they would find it, so perhaps immortality was close. Suddenly, a servant interrupted them, informing that Hato had died during their absence, but he was killed by a warrior, not a monster. As events unfolded, Veet and Main were inside the carriage. Veet asked her why she ate so much, noting that she was close to consuming all the supplies that Haroon had given them. He asked if she was sure she had a skill for anger and not gluttony. The carriage's captain chimed in that they had had that discussion before. At that moment, Main tasted some food for Veet and immediately lay down on his lap. He questioned why she didn't sleep on the ground, to which she replied that the ground was hard. Before he could say anything else, he found that Main had fallen asleep. The glutton wondered what Main was fighting against, and the glutton remained silent, telling Veet that he would understand on his own if he kept her company. Veet sensed trouble brewing nearby. Meanwhile, Miria was asking Roxy Roxy when they would reach Gallia. Roxy informed her that they were close to the border now, while Mogan stated that they were about to reach Hausen. Soon, they arrived at Haroun's castle in Hausen. When Miria expressed her admiration for the castle, Roxy mentioned that Mr. Haroun used to live there. Miria then asked about the current lord of the castle. Roxy replied that a Lord Leech was in control now, but looking at it now, she felt no presence of any monsters. Mogan guessed that the castle might have been liberated from Leech. Just then, Haroun welcomed them after introducing himself. Miria impulsively asked him if he had not retired, which Roxy scolded her for. Mogan bowed to Haroun, stating that he was honored to meet the head of the Barbados family, one of the 5 great families, and he couldn't believe he was meeting the skilled swordsman Haroun Barbados, known as the Sword of Light. At that moment, Roxy apologized to Haroun for their sudden intrusiveness in Hausen. To her surprise, Haroun remarked that she had grown a lot. When she asked how he knew her, he informed her that he was an old acquaintance of Mason and Aisha, and he was the one who gave her name at birth. Roxy was stunned, saying her parents never mentioned that before. Mogan teased her, saying he was jealous of her because a hero like Haroun gave her name. Haroun clarified that he was a former hero and continued, explaining that after his failure to protect those he was supposed to safeguard, there was no need for him to fight anymore. Roxy questioned him skeptically if he had dealt with Lord Leech, and Haroun informed her that a young man had helped him with that. Mogan commented that the young man must be a talented warrior to have slain a crowned beast. Miria eagerly asked about this young man, wanting to meet him, but Haroun told her he had left. Roxy then requested the young man's name to inform the capital about how they had defeated Lord Leech. Haroun apologized, stating that he couldn't reveal the young man's name, recalling when Veet had asked him not to tell anyone if asked. Haroun told Roxy that the young man had asked him to keep his name secret, for which he expressed his apologies. Roxy understood and turned to continue on her way, but stopped when Haroun asked her if her destination was Gallia. She inquired how he knew, as she hadn't disclosed this to him. He claimed that only one reason would lead a young holy knight to come here, which was a request from the Fleric family. Roxy told him she volunteered of her own accord, but Haroun insisted that she was only being manipulated, asserting that the Barbados and Hart families had always been a nuisance to the Flerics. Roxy replied that she inherited her father's ideals and would protect people no matter what. Haroun was surprised by Mason's death and offered to train Roxy, to which she agreed. Haroun began training her, sword fighting against her. On the other side, Veet and Main arrived at a deserted place that resembled ruins. Veet asked her why the place looked abandoned. Main replied that she was born in that spot and was taken to the imperial capital right after her birth, so she didn't remember anything, but it was important to her. Veet mentioned that he thought Gallia was destroyed 0 years ago. Main took a few steps forward with Veet following her when he was shocked to see a cocoon in front of him. Veet then asked the glutton about that thing, and the glutton explained that it was a chimera, a biological weapon that the Gallia army tested in the past, but it was a complete failure. At that moment, Main declared that it was time to repay her debt. Veet asked her if they were going to fight that thing, and she informed him that it was still in the larval stage and hadn't grown, so they could defeat it. Veet asked what they should do, and she told him they needed to destroy its spirit. Veet understood that she wanted him to use his gluttony skill. Main rushed toward the cocoon and smashed it, revealing a massive monster inside. At that moment, Veet noticed that a woman was trapped within the monster, but Main told him that was just to scare him. She instructed him to fight the monster directly without looking at it, but Veet felt sympathy for the woman, stating that if he consumed the monster's spirit, she would suffer. Main assured him that the woman was the essence of the monster and he had to eliminate her, not to be deceived by appearances, as that woman was a beast disguised in human skin. Suddenly, the monster's essence illuminated, and molten lava erupted everywhere. Veet and Main ran, and Veet requested the great harvester weapon from the glutton. The glutton informed him that the harvester wouldn't be able to cut through the lava. Main then told Veet to retreat and struck the lava with her axe, separating the lava from where they stood. They parted ways to fight, and Veet used petrification arrows to stop the monster, but he was shocked to find the monster easily regenerating its lost parts while Main attacked it. Veet noticed that Main's weapon, laziness, had become stronger. The glutton explained that laziness gets stronger with each swing but had the downside of reducing the wielder's agility. Suddenly, after one of Main's strikes, the monster transformed and sprouted wings. Main instructed Veet to hide behind her. Veet warned her that he would soon enter a ravenous state, and Main cautioned him against that, lest gluttony overcome him. He acknowledged knowing that. Then Veet's eyes quickly changed color, and he urged Main to counterattack as well. Main struck the ground with her axe while Veet jumped up, asking the glutton to transform into a blood termagant. They launched their attacks together, but the monster created a magical barrier. Veet attempted to cut through it with the Great Harvester but failed, forcing him to check the statistics to find the weakest point of the magical flow to strike it. He succeeded in hitting it, but the woman in the monster's essence looked at him, causing a distraction, and the monster monster fled. Main told Vite to quickly get on her axe, and she would chase after the monster. Vite was shocked to find his eye bleeding but still sat on the axe. Main threw him into the sky to chase the monster. The glutton informed Vite that he could transform into level 2 and take on a different form, and Vite commanded him to do so. The glutton transformed, advising Vite to aim directly at the core of the magical essence, but with caution. While Vite was about to aim at the monster, the woman caught him in a magical barrier, declaring she would burn herself and wanted to kill him with her. However, Vite was quicker, stabbing her in one swift motion with his blade. At that moment, Vite witnessed distorted memories of a group of people, but he didn't recognize who they were. Afterward, his gluttony skill activated, but he was surprised not to feel his usual exhilaration. The glutton explained that this was because he had just consumed one of his peers. Vite then confronted Main, asking if she knew that woman. She told him that if anyone became a chimera, they had to be killed. Vite then asked her to kill him if he ever lost control one day, as she was the only one who could stop him. Main hugged him, promising she would, and thanked him. Afterwards, he told her he would head to Babylon and asked where she would go. She stated she had promised the others to build a village for them, and expressed her intuition that she felt he would be dead before their second meeting. At that moment, Vite received the magical shield, and Main departed. Vite asked her to wait and help him increase his stats, but she left. As events continued, Vite arrived at Babylon, the stronghold that separated the kingdom from Gallia, where its walls were made of steel that had withstood monster attacks for thousands of years. Along the way, the glutton pointed out the Babylon gate leading to Gallia. Vite asked if he knew the way, and he replied that he had come with his previous wielder, who died and left him behind. Then, Vite reached the northern gate of Babylon, and was shocked to find that the meat skewer there cost 5 times what it did in the capital. Suddenly, a procession of Babylon's new lord arrived from the capital, and Vite was astonished to see that it was Roxy. Then the greedy one began to tell Vite that Babylon includes various warriors, including skilled mercenaries, former sacred knights, and those who harbor grudges against the sacred knights. He emphasized that if one is strong enough, their mistakes will be forgiven in Babylon, as they need as much help as possible to deal with monsters. At that moment, Vite remarked that it seemed like the perfect place for him. Meanwhile, someone greeted Roxy, introducing himself as Northern Alistair, explaining that he was honored to serve Lady Roxy, heir to one of the 5 families. Roxy asked if he was in charge of maintaining order in Babylon during her father's absence, and thanked him for his service. Northern confirmed that he was indeed responsible for order, but he failed to save Mr. Mason and apologized for that. Roxy asked him to lift his head, assuring him that she had come to follow in her father's footsteps, and that they must defend Gallia against the hordes of monsters. Roxy then shook his hand, and Miria noticed that Northern was staring intently at Roxy. At that point, Miria commented that it would be best to go save Lady Roxy because she was in danger, but Mogan grabbed her by the neck, telling her she was foolish, and that messing with a sacred knight could cost her life. Simultaneously, Roxy called for them to stroll with her in the town, while Vite wandered around, thinking to himself that he needed 10 gold pieces for a room, and another gold piece for breakfast, realizing that his money wouldn't be enough for anything. Suddenly, the greedy one asked him to stop, saying there was a sheath that felt like it was calling him. Vite looked at the sheath and remarked that it seemed expensive. The greedy one pleaded with him not to be stingy, assuring him he could make a lot from hunting monsters. Just then, the sheath vendor appeared and asked Vite if he was looking for him, but before Vite could respond, the vendor rushed towards him, examining his cloak and commenting that the burns were caused by fireballs, perhaps from something hotter. Vite asked in surprise if he could tell that, and the vendor confirmed that he could. The greedy one told Vite that the man's eyes were excellent at noticing details, so they would buy the sheath from him. When Vite asked about the price, the vendor told him it was for display only and that he could make a proper sheath for his sword. Vite agreed, and as the vendor began working, he commented in admiration that he had never seen a sword held with one hand like Vite's. Then the vendor thought for a moment and told Vite that if he wanted a sheath for this sword, it would be around 500 gold pieces. At that point, Vite took his sword and left, asking the vendor to forget it. He continued on, telling the greedy one that the prices were too high in Babylon, emphasizing that they should first figure out their daily needs before thinking of such luxuries. Just then, someone called out to Vite, asking if he wanted to join them to work as a volunteer soldier in the capital. Vite apologized, saying he didn't want to join anyone. The man guessed that he was a former knight, but his appearance didn't suggest that. The man and his companions then left Vite behind. Here, Vite decided to improve his appearance to avoid being messed with by people like that man. He then went monster hunting and earned a lot of money. When he arrived in Gallia, the bodies of monsters were everywhere, and the smell was unbearable, along with toxic spores of algae floating in the air. The greedy one warned Vite not to take a deep breath, or else the algae would grow in his lungs. He informed him that a delegation of monsters was on its way, the orcs, a type of common monster in Gallia, adding that they armed themselves with simple weapons but were very smart. He advised him to fight as if he were fighting a human. Vite drew his sword, saying it would be a good opportunity to test the skills Aaron had taught him, but he was surprised to see the same man who had offered him to joining the battle against the orcs. He stopped, but the greedy one chided him, urging him to move forward sword to fight the orcs because he wanted a new sheath. Veit tried to hesitate, but the greedy one told him the orcs were numerous and seemed to be planning to ambush the monster hunters from both sides. Veit was persuaded by his words and then charged quickly at the orcs, who began shooting fire arrows at the hunters. At that moment, the greedy one transformed into a magical shield resembling a fortress and told Veit to start running toward the orcs and not to stop. Veit immediately executed the command. As he charged toward the orcs, every orc that touched the shield exploded and fell to the ground. When the battle ended, Veit was surprised that the skill of greed hadn't triggered this time. The greedy one asked him if he felt that since he took down the monster Hanayome. Veit confirmed that he did. The greedy one responded that they now had to cut off the ears of the orcs and return to the city to claim the reward. Indeed, Veit went to collect the reward, but the other monster hunters threatened him, accusing him of coming to steal their loot. They started ganging up on him to take the reward, but he fought them all off and succeeded. Meanwhile, the clerk in the reward office finished counting the orc ears and awarded Veit 100 gold pieces while calling him Mr. Corpse. Suddenly, he heard Roxy's angry voice asking if he was responsible for the chaos. A few moments later, Roxy said she understood the situation. He only attacked them after they initiated it, and his actions were in self-defense. Veit then asked her what his fate was now, and Roxy told him that he had somewhat overreacted, but she wouldn't impose any punishment on him this time, as she was partially responsible for the decline of order in Babylon. Roxy then turned to the monster hunters and told them she would overlook their actions as well, on the condition that they spend the night in jail. At this point, Veit got lost in memories with Roxy. She called him, wondering if he was listening to her, but Miria informed her that he wasn't, and began to attack him, trying to remove his mask, claiming he should reveal his face when talking to Lady Roxy. Mogan told her that masks were part of a warrior's equipment, while Roxy asked her to stop that. Veit thanked Roxy, but she asked him his name. He told her he was called Corpse. Roxy then asked him not to cause any further trouble and advised him to pay more attention to his appearance, since it was somewhat distracting. Suddenly, Veit dashed off in front of her like a cannonball, leading her to wonder what was wrong with him. Mogan informed her that Veit looked thin and appeared weak at first glance, but he wondered what kind of warrior he was, as he had defeated everyone. On the other side, Veit wandered around the town, chatting with the greedy one and guessing that Roxy hated him. At that moment, the vendor appeared in front of him, telling him he heard about Veit's victory over the savages, and offered him to wear his equipment during battles. He introduced himself as Jid, mentioning he opened his shop 3 months ago. Here, Veit understood that Jid wanted him to wear the equipment to promote it and boost Jid's reputation in town. Jid confessed that he had been looking for a suitable warrior for this, and asked if Veit wanted to work with him. Veit stood up and shook Jid's hand, confirming that there was no reason to refuse such an offer. Shortly afterward, Jid prepared Veit to look like a real warrior. The greedy one marveled at how good he looked, while Jid stated that the entire equipment cost only 80 gold pieces. The greedy one was astonished, thinking Jid wouldn't charge him since Veit would be promoting his equipment. However, Jid offered to take only half the price. After that, Veit headed off to find something to satisfy his hunger. He entered a bustling tavern and saw many people gathered around a woman. The moment Veit glanced at her, he felt drawn to her intensely. The woman approached him, confirming she had been waiting for him, and even called him by name. Veit was surprised and wondered how she knew him even though he was wearing a mask. The woman told him they were peers after all, and that she was Eris the Desire. After that, the two sat together. Eris asked Veit to remove his mask because she wanted to see him up close. Veit asked her why she was waiting for him. She told him she had been watching him since he was in the capital, and when the skill of greed was about to weaken within him, she thought about speaking to him but hesitated, knowing that he would meet the greedy one sooner or later. Veit then asked if she knew about Maine as well. She replied that she was from the second generation and thus didn't know anyone from the first generation well. She then congratulated him on killing Hanayome, clarifying that all chimeras come from the capital of Gallia, which piqued her curiosity about who transferred the cocoon to where it was found. She told him that there were likely many more cocoons, which would pose danger, and that the sacred knights would not be able to handle them. Eris quickly informed him that she waited for him because she was the protector of the kingdom along with her skill, and since she was a guardian of the kingdom, she prioritized the kingdom's interests over anyone else's. Veit asked her what she was aiming for, and she said, Roxy Hart. On the other side, Roxy was reviewing Northern's plans, who informed her that there was a rush in the east of the capital. She ordered him to move there immediately. Meanwhile, Veit was enraged at Eris, accusing her of madness for wanting Roxy dead, arguing that this would generate a crowned human generation. Yet Veit contended that killing Roxy would not bring anything good to anyone. He then left, determined to protect Roxy, while Eris internally noted that the plan had already begun. Roxy learned from Nordren that they had lost contact with the forces sent to gather raw materials from Gallia, so she ordered Nordren to prepare the troops to chase after them and rescue them immediately. Meanwhile, Jid was telling Veit that he needed magical crystals to make the perfect sheath for his sword, as they were difficult to obtain. However, He had recently heard that the royal army was overseeing the stockpile of magical crystals, so the greedy one suggested to Vite that they go collect the crystals themselves. Vite asked Jid where those crystals were, and Jid replied that they were located in Gallia. Vite then said he would go get them, to which Jid informed him he would get a discount in that case, and gave him a map that belonged to his teacher, who was a soldier in his youth, explaining that the indicated places were very far to the south, near the Great Valley. Events quickly unfolded as Vite stood in Gallia facing monsters, telling the greedy one that he would use the protective shield. The greedy one remarked that it was a good choice. Soon, the mission was successful, activating his gluttony skill. On the other side, Miria was trying to use a compass to reach the Great Valley, but Nordrin surprised her by saying that the compass didn't work in that area. Miria asked him how they would get to the valley, and Mogan replied that they would likely find their way by following the moon and stars, but unfortunately, the clouds were obscuring them. Roxy then thought for a moment and suggested they could reach the Great Valley by tracking the orcs' trail, but she quickly realized that there were more monsters than orcs in Gallia, and there were also monsters heading in the direction they would take. So, Roxy warned her team to be careful as they advanced. Elsewhere, Vite took a short break while the greedy one told him he was starting to show the desired behavior, as a warrior must always rest well before battle. Suddenly, Vite dozed off and found himself in a strange place with the chimera girl, Haniel, in front of him. She seemed to be trying to tell him something, but he couldn't hear her due to the noise. Then Vite noticed he was standing in a place resembling a pool of blood filled with many monsters and people. Hadu emerged from that pool and pulled Vite into it. Vite then woke up and told the greedy one that he felt the monsters were closing in on them, and that these monsters were not orc monsters. The greedy one suggested that Vite use his night vision ability to see the monsters. Vite did so and discovered that they were salamander monsters, 4 in total. At that moment, the greedy one planned for them to first attack with petrification magic using the black bow. Vite released his first arrows toward the salamanders, but he requested the greedy one to hold on a bit because he sensed something strange about one of the salamanders. The greedy one confirmed that he was right because salamanders typically flee when they take significant damage. Vite then asked why the salamanders were not fleeing, and were not trying to attack him either, guessing that something was controlling those monsters. The greedy one suggested that they should follow the salamanders instead. On the other side, chaos erupted among Roxy's forces as the salamander monsters surrounded them, causing panic as they breathed fire at them. Roxy called out for Nordrin in fear, wondering where he was, and suddenly, Nordrin appeared, injured and apologizing to Roxy. Meanwhile, Mogan was behind Roxy trying to protect her from the salamander's flames. At that moment, Roxy noticed that the salamander's heat had melted the ground completely. Miria then threatened the salamander, drawing her magical sword to defend Roxy, but she failed. To the contrary, the salamander attacked her. Roxy ran towards her anxiously, telling her she was foolish for using the magical sword against the salamander. In the moment when the salamander was about to finish off Roxy and Miria together, Vite jumped in front of the salamander with his protective shield, blocking the salamander's flames from hitting Roxy and Miria. He asked Roxy if she was okay. Before she could answer, Vite quickly dashed toward the salamander, which was getting ready for a second attack. Mogan expressed his astonishment at Vite's skill, saying he couldn't believe there was a warrior who could harness that much power from a common skill like the sharp edge. After the battle ended, Roxy thanked Vite for his help, assuring him that without him, more of her soldiers would have died. But when she asked Miria to thank Vite as well, Miria refused, saying she hadn't requested his help. Then, Mogan introduced himself to Vite, stating he was the unit leader and that the foolish one was named Miria, while Roxy introduced Nordrin to Vite, telling him he was a holy knight entrusted with protecting Babylon. Nordrin thanked him, expressing gratitude for saving them. Vite mentioned that there was something more important troubling him, and pointed to the emblem that was marked on the heads of the 4 salamanders. Miria remarked that this was indeed suspicious, while Mogan noted that monsters typically do not work together, and he had noticed they were cooperating to target Lady Roxy. Roxy suggested it could just be a coincidence. Nordrin commented that things in Gallia had become unpredictable, especially after the Holy Dragon left its lair. After that, Vite guided them to the Great Valley, and Roxy thanked him, while Mogan said they were fortunate that Mr. Gutha was heading in the same direction as them. Miria then asked Vite to forgive them, as they needed to hurry to rescue the supply unit. Just then, Roxy tried to shake Vite's hand in preparation for leaving, but Miria grabbed Vite's hand, interrupting the moment. Roxy apologized to Vite for that, while Vite was astonished because he heard Miria's inner voice when she grabbed his hand, describing him as a curse and wishing he would just leave without getting too close to her lady. After that, Vite continued on his way until he reached a place where the air was incredibly pure, guessing it was due to an ancient battle. He then discovered a petrified monster in his path and later found a monster graveyard. At that moment, the greedy one asked if he had found the magical crystals, and Vite remembered Jid's words about the crystals, that they had no color and were transparent but emitted a purple sparkle. He said he didn't see anything resembling that. Suddenly, he saw air Eris nearby, but she quickly ran away. Then the greedy one spotted a giant chimera and pointed it out, telling Vite that it was likely buried here after an ancient battle. Its head began to emerge due to erosion. Vite wondered if Eris was responsible for that. Suddenly, he heard an explosion coming from the area where Roxy was searching, so he ran there immediately. Miria was there, holding her sword up to the monsters, declaring that she would protect Lady Roxy. However, the monsters were extremely violent, resembling bombs. When one of the giant monsters appeared in front of Roxy, she was surprised by a flying fire arrow aimed at the monster. When she turned to see the source, she saw Vite, and she exclaimed in disbelief, "Mr. Gutha?" Vite asked her if she was okay, and she confirmed it, explaining that Mogan was injured while trying to protect Miria, and that Nordrun was also injured. Vite then looked at the monsters and said they didn't regenerate as quickly as the Chimera, and that their weakness was their core. Roxy asked him what he meant, and he pointed to the monster's chest, asking if she could see the cores embedded in their chests, explaining that they were the cores that allowed the monsters to move, and they needed to eliminate them. Roxy said she was ready for that, and the two charged at the monster that unleashed fire toward them, trying to protect its core by covering it with its hands. However, Vite resisted its flames, and ordered Roxy to advance to eliminate the monster's core. Meanwhile, Miria was also contributing by using Flamberge flames to fend off the monster's flames. After they took down the first monster, Roxy instructed Miria to lead the forces to safety, saying she and Mr. Gutha would handle the rest of the monsters. They both rushed to fight side by side while the monsters spewed flames. Soon, one of the monsters jumped up and then fell, creating a crack in the ground that knocked Roxy off her feet. However, Vite caught her before she fell. Afterward, Vite found himself falling into some kind of cave with Roxy beside him, calming him that she would be fine once she rested a bit. Vite remarked that this was expected from a holy knight, and asked her if they had received the supplies. Roxy told him they arrived only to find all their forces burned to death. Roxy then asked him how he knew about the Chimera, to which Vite replied that a girl had told him about them. Roxy asked if that girl had a giant axe, confirming she had seen her on her way. She also heard rumors that she had overwhelmed the Lord of Babylon with her axe, and there were some saying she was traveling with a young man wearing a skull mask. Vite informed her that she had been with him, making Roxy laugh as she said he reminded her of someone she knew who was in the capital now, yet she felt he was beside her now. Then she asked if Vite was happy at that moment. Vite told her he was certainly happy because someone cared about him that much. Just then, Vite's eye color changed, and he covered it with his hand, asking Roxy not to look. He ran toward the monster and plunged his blade into its chest. After Vite defeated the monster, he noticed it bore the same emblem as the salamanders. He remembered Eris saying that Roxy would die in Gallia and that she would pay the price. Roxy then caught up with him, telling him they would be fine now. Suddenly, the place collapsed, and Vite shielded her with his armor. Magical crystals appeared shaped like petrified monsters. After that, Roxy reunited with her companions, expressing her happiness that they were safe. The events continued to unfold, and after returning to Babylon, Vite was surprised to find Roxy challenging him to a sword duel. He asked her if he had done something wrong, and Miria informed him that he had been involved in 56 violent incidents with other warriors. She insisted that he not pretend to be innocent, as he had also destroyed 20 facilities, all this happening just 1 month after their return from the Great Valley. Vite defended himself, saying that all those were attacks made against him. Roxy, however, told him that she would not overlook any acts of violence he had committed. When he asked her what she wanted, she ordered him to join the royal army, assuring him that if he did, even the rowdiest of warriors would avoid him. Vite replied that he wasn't looking to be anyone's follower because freedom was everything to him. Roxy said she expected that response and gave him a choice, either face her in a duel or think about the consequences of his actions in prison. Vite drew his sword and charged at her quickly, and both displayed their swordsmanship in front of the audience. However, he soon admitted to himself that he was unable to defeat Roxy, even though he was supposed to have the advantage according to his stats. Greed reminded him then that Roxy was a holy knight above all else. Roxy warned him again that she did not intend to take the duel lightly. Vite then thought to himself that this was called the technical skills a knight gains through daily practice. Suddenly, he got lost in Roxy's eyes, and when he came back to reality, Roxy had passed through him, realizing that she was after his mask. Roxy charged at Vite again swiftly, but he dodged her attacks and jumped back. She told him to take it seriously if he didn't want to reveal his identity because dodging wouldn't lead him to victory. Vite decided to comply with her order, activating his holy sword technique. The onlookers, including Roxy, were astonished, and she asked how he could use that technique without holding a holy sword. He explained that his sheath was specially made for his sword, enhanced for holy sword techniques, and crafted from magical crystals he gathered from the Great Valley himself. Roxy, puzzled, asked if if he was a former holy knight since he had the ability to wield such techniques. Vite confirmed that he was just a warrior, and then he charged fiercely at Roxy, who immediately blocked his sword. Vite then noticed the necklace Roxy wore, made from the raw gemstone he had given her, and his mind wandered slightly. Roxy swiftly knocked his sword away, saying he had left a gap. Vite admitted she won and picked up his sword again. Miria arrogantly stated that Roxy wouldn't lose to someone like him, while Roxy asked Vite why he suddenly eased up during the fight. When she asked what she meant, she warned him not to pretend to be foolish. Vite tried to ignore her words and walk away, but she stopped him, asking if he learned his fighting skills from Mr. Haroun. She confirmed she knew because she had also learned from Haroun on her way to Babylon. She then recalled when Haroun told her he decided to wield the sword again after meeting a young man heading to Gallia, affirming that this young man possessed immense power that had caused him trouble. At that moment, Roxy tried to offer Vite something, but he interrupted, stating the problem was his own, and advised her to think about protecting herself in Gallia only. Vite turned to continue on his way until he was stopped by Mogan, who said it was impressive, and considering his skills, it was no wonder he had been able to kill that beast. Vite paused briefly when Mogan asked if he also thought someone was controlling that beast. He told Mogan he had examined that beast after killing it and noticed it bore the same salamander insignia. Mogan replied that his family had studied Gallia's lost technology for generations, and his father was a talented researcher, as was his daughter. Vite explained that the Chimera was an artificial monster designed specifically using Gallia's technology. He offered Mogan to let his daughter examine one of the Chimera beasts. Mogan asked if he was trying to get to know his daughter, and before Vite could respond, Mogan nervously raised his weapon and told him he wouldn't allow him to meet his daughter, Rain. Mogan then began to run after him. In the lab, the researcher was telling Rain there were rumors that Rafal had locked himself in his room to study the Philosopher's Stone. Rain responded in surprise, "The Philosopher's Stone?" The researcher informed her that Rafal might have gotten it from Timbrin because he had gone there on a journey before Hadu died. Rain immediately picked up a book, looking for the Philosopher's Stone, stating it could heal all injuries and grant immense power, but at the same time, overpower one's mind and body. On the other hand, Vite was in the inn thinking about what Maine had told him, where she said he had to aim for the E-Realm. Vite then asked her what the E-Realm meant. Maine explained that it was a power level where the Holy Dragon exists, and if he couldn't reach it, he wouldn't be able to fight the dragon. She also warned him not to push himself too hard, as he could lose control and let his skills surpass him. Suddenly, Vite was jolted from his distraction by an alarm, while Northern was simultaneously informing Roxy that a death march was approaching them. Roxy decided to move to confront them, while Vite also set off to assess the situation, saying, "So this is the death march." At that moment, Roxy appeared with her royal army. Greed told Vite that something was approaching the royal army from the east. Vite looked around carefully and discovered that this thing was moving through the ground like a whale swimming in water, and its size was enormous. Vite then realized that if this creature continued to move this way, it would reach the royal army soon. He said that since Roxy and the others were focused on the death march, they would definitely be in big trouble if they faced a surprise attack. Vite then used his bow, determined to charge his shot using his greed skill boost, and fire a spiraled shot to penetrate this underground creature. Suddenly, the creature appeared before Vite. He jumped up, charging at it with his sword. He recognized the monster as the Earth Violator Omega Slime, a monster whose endurance rating surpassed 10 million. At that moment, Greed informed him that even the Holy Knight himself wouldn't be able to confront this beast, advising him to transform into the magical armor. As the Omega bombarded him with its horrible-smelling DNA, Vite quickly defended himself with the protective armor. Greed warned him not to touch the Omega's DNA, stressing it contained corrosive magic as well, and he would die if he touched it. He also cautioned against splitting the Omega, as its DNA would spread everywhere, causing Vite's bones to corrode to the end. Vite then asked what they should do. Greed suggested they eliminate the Omega with fireballs, and indeed Vite did so, but he was shocked that the Omega vanished for a moment before falling through a crack in the ground and continued moving towards the royal army. Vite tried to follow it, but the Omega cut him off by splitting into smaller parts that began to attack him, trying to delay him from saving the royal army. However, Vite quickly overcame them and began to devise a plan to eliminate the Omega. He then transformed Greed into a blood raven and launched his spiraled shot at the beast, only to be surprised that it was still alive even though he drained its life away. He wondered in disbelief what was happening. Suddenly, a masked figure appeared, and Vite charged towards him quickly, demanding to see his face. But the masked figure brandished his weapon at Vite, a lethal sin weapon as well. When Vite got closer to the masked figure, numerous Omega cut him off, where Vite discovered that the Omega was still alive due to its splitting fighting ability. The essence of the Omega itself became capable of separating, allowing it to survive. Vite quickly dealt with the Omega and aimed his arrow at the masked figure, but the figure deflected his shot with a magical barrier. Vite charged at the masked figure with his sword swiftly. The masked figure told him he was wasting his time. Vite was stunned because he had believed all along that the masked figure was Iris, but the masked figure pushed him away and began firing at him. Although Vite used the protective armor, the masked figure struck him until he bled. Vite then drew the power he needed from the greed skill, achieving the E-realm level, and rose to confront the masked figure. The masked figure jumped up quickly and unleashed several Omega to obstruct Vite's path, but Vite followed the masked figure nonetheless. The masked figure fired at Vite, but failed to hit him. Vite swiftly knocked off the mask, discovering it was Northern. Stunned, Vite asked Northern in disbelief what he intended to do, but Northern suddenly called forth the Holy Dragon, stating to Vite that the dragon had 30 seconds to reach Roxy. Vite was shocked, while Northern told him he and the dragon would do their best to kill Roxy. Vite dashed towards Roxy at lightning speed, while on the other hand, Mogan was urging the soldiers to run to safety because the Holy Dragon had arrived. Roxy stood in front of the Holy Dragon, which emitted a colossal light from its mouth that pushed everyone back. Just as Roxy was about to be harmed, Vite arrived and shielded her from the dragon's energy with his protective armor, knocking off his mask. At that moment, Roxy called out to him, "Vi." Then, Vite turned to Roxy and asked her to leave quickly before the dragon attacked again, saying he would buy her some time. He apologized for lying to her for so long, and before Roxy could respond, Vite thanked her for everything and hurried off. He stood in front of the dragon, telling Greed that he was depending on him. Soon, he summoned the power of the Great Cross, and used it to restrain the Holy Dragon with his cross power technique. Then Northern appeared, expressing surprise at what Vite had done, calling it a clever trick. Vite pushed him back, saying they could now fight man to man, and they both began to duel, showcasing their sword skills. Vite soon noticed his strength dwindling, and Greed informed him there were 3 reasons for this. First, entering the field with power. Second, having to consume some of his strength to maintain the technique he was using. And before Greed could explain the third reason, Northern pushed him away, saying he hadn't decided to fight seriously yet. Vite responded to this attack, but Northern told him his attack was too reckless. Then Northern saw through Vite's trick and told him he had figured out his plan. Vite looked tense, and Northern seized that moment to quickly get past Vite and cut his arm, making Vite fall to the ground. Northern told him it was over, then approached him, saying he had to pay the price now for all the trouble he had caused because Iris had pinned her hopes on him. Before Northern could finish his speech, he was shocked to find Vite stabbing him from behind with his sword. Northern asked in disbelief how Vite had created that illusion spell and when. Vite told him he had guessed Northern would let his guard down when he believed he was the winner. Northern asked if that was why Vite sacrificed his arm. Vite replied that it was a bet between gaining everything or nothing at all, and then he killed him. Vite's gluttony skill activated, and he transported himself to the same place he had been before, where Haniel appeared again, introducing herself as Luna and thanking him for killing her. She apologized and said she couldn't continue to help him, showing him where she had been suppressing his gluttony skill. Vite remarked that she was the one responsible for that. She apologized again, saying she couldn't support him any longer, and warned him against consuming the Holy Dragon, or he would lose control of himself. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to crumble, and Greed grabbed his hand after turning into a human. He told Vite that time was running out. Vite thanked Haniel for her warning, saying he still couldn't allow the dragon to roam free and would kill it. Then Haniel's world collapsed, and Vite returned to reality, telling Greed he had been human in the past. Greed asked him to consider this just a temporary form. The dragon broke its chains, and Vite asked Greed what the plan was to deal with the dragon. Greed told him that using a one-handed shield would be difficult. Vite then pushed Greed toward the dragon, flying at it with a punch of destruction, picked up his sword again, jumped toward the dragon, and began cutting it into pieces. The dragon lay sprawled on the ground, and Vite struck it down with his sword, ending its life. Vite's gluttony skill activated, and he tried to control it before turning into a monster. In that moment, he decided to sacrifice his skills and return to his initial stats to lessen the damage. Greed warned him that even if he did that, his skills would consume him one day. Suddenly, Maine appeared, saying she didn't think this day would come so soon. Vite begged her to kill him. She told him she had warned him not to overexert himself. He apologized to her, and then she lifted her axe, saying she would keep her promise. But just as Maine raised her axe and decided to drop it on him, Roxy arrived, rolling Vite away and creating a fissure in the ground. Vite asked her why she did that and turned his head away, asking her not to look at him that way because he didn't want her to see him like this. She asked him tearfully if he thought this reason was enough to hate him. Then she told him seriously that he would still be Vite, no matter the power he held, and asked him not to kill himself. Meanwhile, Vite's gluttony skill calmed down, surprising him, while Roxy reached out her hand, asking him to return to Babylon. Vite took her hand, amazed that she accepted him even after knowing the truth, and that she saved him even though he kept saying he would save save her. At that moment, Main thought to herself that Veet found someone to support him. After that, events unfolded, and Veet woke up in the inn, remembering Northern had cut his left arm off. He wondered how long he had been asleep when suddenly the door opened and Iris and Main came in. Iris handed him greed and informed him that he had forgotten it, and she had to go get it herself since, apparently, Main had forgotten to bring it. Main said she had been busy dealing with envy, while Iris continued, saying it would be bad if another vessel like Northern appeared and started causing trouble again. Veet asked her what was happening, and Iris explained that envy had controlled Northern's gun. Veet then asked Greed if he knew about this. Greed said he had no idea but wasn't surprised. Veet asked Main and Iris what they had done with envy. Main replied that they had thrown him to the other side of Gallia. Iris then told Veet that they needed his help after he proved himself by killing the Holy Dragon, explaining that there was no longer a need to create a human crowned with Roxy's death. Veet asked her to promise that she wouldn't harm Roxy first, and he would listen to her. Iris told him that envy had been the one who suggested Roxy's death, but she regretted agreeing with him. She informed him that the country would enter a new era now that the Holy Dragon was dead, so all the bearers of the deadly sins had to handle what would happen next, and he had no right to refuse. Veet asked her what she meant. Iris said they first had to treat his arm and leave before Roxy arrived. Veet seriously asked if she could restore his arm. Meanwhile, Miria was training to fight with a sword against Morgan when she noticed Roxy leaving, and she quickly ran to her, asking if she was going out. Roxy confirmed that and instructed her to handle things until she returned. Soon, Roxy arrived at the inn carrying grapes, beginning to search for Veet, but found a note he left for her, asking for forgiveness for his sudden disappearance and assuring her he would come back to her. Roxy cried and remembered when she first found him, afraid and asking her not to hit him. She then apologized for frightening him and offered him candy, asking him to return home as soon as he ate it. He told her he had no home, no family, and then left, thanking her for her kindness. Meanwhile, Memel told Rafal that Veet was the corpse then, and Rafal confirmed that. Returning to his research, Memel wondered about this research while Veet regained his arm with the help of Main and Iris, who informed him they would meet him in the capital.